On the drive home from Chicago, Emma Carter wove her car between the highway truckers. It was just past 3 in the afternoon, and the sunlight already told the story of autumn's short days. Every time she returned from a business trip, she couldn't suppress her eagerness to rush home to her family. As a manager at an advertising agency, this Chicago presentation had been the biggest project of the quarter. Though it was only a 3-day trip, she felt a bit anxious about leaving the Thanksgiving preparations to her husband Jake. Jake was a wonderful husband. She had met him, an architect, at a coffee shop 10 years ago. When Emma was rushing and spilled her coffee, he helped pick up her papers without caring that his shirt got stained. Emma was instantly captivated by his gentle smile and calm voice that soothed her frantic state. Their 8 years of marriage had been as natural and comfortable as the gentle flow of a calm river. Jake rarely became emotional and always made thoughtful, level-headed decisions. Even on nights when she came home exhausted from work, he would quietly prepare a warm meal and listen to Emma's stories. Their 6-year-old son Oliver was a lively and bright boy who had inherited the best qualities from both parents. Since starting elementary school, he reported new discoveries to his family every day. Last week he got a perfect score on his math test, and this week he eagerly told them about a dinosaur book he borrowed from the library. The weekends when Oliver's laughter echoed throughout the house were Emma's happiest times. She remembered last month's Sunday when the three of them went on a picnic to the nearby park. As Jake spread out the sandwiches he had brought, Oliver innocently said, "Mommy, we're the happiest family in the world, aren't we?" Those words still warmed Emma's heart. The car radio was playing a Thanksgiving special program. When Emma thought about her sister Rachel, her expression clouded slightly. 3 months ago, Rachel had ended her 5-year marriage. Though her relationship with her husband Mark had grown cold over the last 2 years, the decision to divorce had been a major blow to her. Having just become independent as a freelance graphic designer, she was in an unstable situation both financially and emotionally. Since moving to a small apartment about 20 minutes' drive from their parents' house, Rachel had begun visiting Emma's home frequently. At first, Emma had welcomed her sister's frequent visits. Oliver was also fond of Rachel, and he became even more active than usual when she came over. Being in creative work, Rachel was good at drawing and doing crafts with Oliver. However, recently Emma had begun to feel a subtle sense of unease. She was starting to worry as a sister about Rachel's expressions when talking with Jake and the way she acted even more cheerful in front of him. Inviting her sister for Thanksgiving was a natural choice for Emma. It was certainly better for her to spend time with family than to be alone in her apartment. Rachel had gladly accepted the invitation. "Emma, thank you so much. Lately when I'm alone, I overthink everything," she had said with a sigh of relief over the phone. There was a loneliness and fatigue in her sister's voice that had been detectable since the divorce. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Emma turned onto her street. As usual, the quiet residential neighborhood echoed with sounds of Thanksgiving preparations from each household. Children's laughter could be heard from the corner house, and an elderly couple was raking leaves in the yard across the street. As Emma approached her house, her heart filled with love for her family. Though she had spoken with them by phone every night during her trip, the joy of seeing them in person was exceptional. When she pulled into her driveway, she could see Rachel's red Honda Accord parked there. Emma felt relieved. The fact that her sister had arrived as planned meant that the Thanksgiving preparations were probably going smoothly. Though Jake wasn't skilled at cooking, his meticulous nature meant he was surely cooperating with Rachel to start preparing the turkey. Oliver was probably delighted to see his beloved aunt after so long. Emma looked forward to tonight's dinner. The Thanksgiving table surrounded by the 4 family members, Oliver's innocent smile, Jake's gentle smile, and Rachel's bright expression after so long. The fatigue from her business trip would be healed by the warmth of her family. As Emma closed her car door and walked toward the front entrance, she noticed something odd. Usually at this time, the pleasant aroma of cooking should have been drifting from inside the house. But today, a different smell hit her nose. A burnt, sharp smell that stung her nostrils. Emma smiled slightly, thinking Jake must be struggling with unfamiliar cooking. Though her husband was meticulous and responsible, he was still a beginner when it came to cooking. When she put her hand on the front door handle, the door opened surprisingly easily. It wasn't locked. Emma's brow furrowed slightly. Jake was normally very security conscious and always locked the door even when leaving the house for a short time. Especially today, with Rachel visiting and Oliver at home, he would be even more careful. He must have forgotten in his concentration on cooking. Emma told herself this as she opened the front door. "I'm home." Emma's cheerful voice echoed in the entrance hall. However, she didn't hear Oliver's usual running footsteps or Jake's "welcome home." Instead, there was a strange silence enveloping the house. A quietness as if no one was there. While taking off her coat, Emma called out again. "Jake? Oliver? Rachel? Where is everyone?" There was still no response. At that moment, a stronger burnt smell drifted from the direction of the kitchen. At the same time, she could hear something sizzling. Emma's worry was gradually growing. Rushing to the kitchen, she found an unbelievable scene. Black smoke was rising from the oven, and the smoke detector was continuously emitting a shrill sound. Emma hurriedly opened the oven to find that what should have been the turkey was completely charred. The surface was pitch black, no longer retaining the shape of food. Looking at the oven, it appeared to have been cooking for hours. While stopping the smoke detector alarm, Emma looked around. On the kitchen counter, half-prepared food was scattered about. Bowls containing chopped celery and onions were placed as if someone had hurriedly abandoned them. Dirty dishes were piled up in the sink, and flour was spilled on the floor. Looking toward the dining table, there was an even stranger scene. The tablecloth was half pulled off, with scattered plates and glasses arranged miserably on top. What particularly caught her eye was a red wine glass that had fallen and broken on the floor. The deep red liquid had soaked into the carpet, leaving what looked like bloodstains. One of the chairs was overturned, with napkins and cutlery scattered around it. It looked as if there had been some kind of struggle. A meticulous person like Jake would never leave such a situation unattended. And above all, this eerie silence was unsettling. There should be 3 family members and her sister, yet there was a quietness as if no one was there, which was abnormal. "Jake! Oliver!" Emma's voice was getting louder. But there was still no response. She decided to go upstairs. As she climbed the stairs, her anxiety mounted with each step. The evening sunlight streaming through the landing window dimly illuminated the hallway. First, she opened the bedroom door. The room was tidy, just as it had been when she made the bed that morning. The inside of the closet and the top of the dresser were all as usual. But there was no sign of anyone. Next, she peered into Oliver's room to find Lego blocks and stuffed animals scattered on the floor, but her son was nowhere to be seen. On the bed, the dinosaur picture book he had been reading that morning lay open. Walking down the hallway, Emma's foot made the sound of breaking glass. Looking down, she saw a picture frame containing a family photo had fallen to the floor, the glass shattered into pieces. The photo was from last month's picnic in the park. The 4 smiling faces now looked distorted through the broken glass. Emma knelt down to pick up the fragments, but her hands were shaking and she couldn't do it properly. At that moment, she heard a faint sound from downstairs. The light closing of a door, or perhaps something falling to the floor. Emma held her breath and listened carefully. But after that, silence returned again. As if it had been her imagination. She checked the other rooms upstairs, but no one was there either. The guest room, the study, the bathroom, all were empty. Emma's anxiety had reached its peak. Where had her family gone? Rachel's car was in the driveway, so why was no one there? The sound of her footsteps returning downstairs echoed unusually loudly in the silence. Emma checked the kitchen and dining room once more, but the situation hadn't changed. The smell of the burnt turkey permeated the entire house, and the red stains from the broken wine glass remained spread on the floor. The remaining possibilities were the basement or the living room. She turned on the basement light and went down the stairs, but it too was empty. Just the usual basement with the washing machine and boiler. Emma's heart was filled with fear and confusion. The worst scenarios flashed through her mind. Had someone broken into the house? Had her family been kidnapped? Or had some accident occurred? She took out her cell phone and tried calling Jake's number, but it just kept ringing with no answer. Rachel's phone was the same. The only place she hadn't checked yet was the living room. Usually the warm room where the family gathered, where Oliver watched TV, Jake read architecture magazines, and Emma did her knitting. But now, she was terrified to open that door. It felt as if something terrible was waiting beyond that door. Emma's hands were trembling. The living room door handle felt cold, like ice. She tried to calm herself with deep breaths, but the sound of her heartbeat echoed in her ears. Slowly pushing the door open, a light creaking sound broke the silence. The room was dim. The curtains that should usually be open were all closed, and the evening sunlight from outside barely filtered through small gaps. Emma reached for the wall switch and turned on the room's lighting. In that instant, her world collapsed. She could see 3 human figures on the floor. At first she thought they might be furniture shadows, but she quickly realized they were people. A small scream escaped from Emma's throat. On the floor in front of the sofa, her husband Jake lay on his back. His face was pale, his glasses had slipped off and fallen to the floor. His usually neatly combed brown hair was disheveled, and his mouth was half open. "Jake!" Emma screamed as she rushed to her husband. Kneeling down and peering into his face, she could tell he was breathing faintly. However, he was unconscious and didn't respond to her calls. When she touched Jake's wrist, she could feel a pulse, but it was weak and his skin was unusually cold. Beside the coffee table, her sister Rachel lay on her side. Her blonde hair covered her face, and her usual lively expression was gone. The red sweater she was wearing looked like blood in the room's dim lighting. Emma touched Rachel's shoulder with trembling hands. She too was unconscious but breathing faintly. And most terrifying of all was the sight of her son Oliver, curled up small near Jake. The 6-year-old's small body lay motionless like a doll, and his usually lively face was pale. Emma rushed to her son and picked up his small body. "Oliver. Please, wake up. It's Mommy." Emma's voice was shaking with tears. Her son's body was light and looked as if he were sleeping, but no matter how much she called to him, he wouldn't open his eyes. However, his chest was moving up and down, so she could tell he was still breathing. Looking around the room, there were traces everywhere indicating there had been a struggle. A chair had fallen over, with cushions thrown nearby. A lamp on the side table was tilted, and magazines were scattered on the floor. In front of the TV, toy cars that Oliver had apparently been playing with were scattered about. Emma took out her cell phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. She failed to press the call button 3 times. When she finally got through, she heard the operator's calm voice. "Help! My family has lost consciousness. All 3 of them are down and not moving." Emma's voice was shrill with tears and panic. "Please calm down. Can you give me your address?" Emma gave her home address in a trembling voice. She almost got the house number wrong and had to repeat it twice. The operator understood her confusion and continued with questions slowly. "Who has lost consciousness?" "My husband, my son, and my sister. They're all collapsed on the floor and won't wake up when I call to them. But they're breathing." "I understand. We're sending an ambulance." "Are you injured?" "I'm fine." But why did this happen? Please listen to what I'm about to tell you. First, check that everyone's airways are clear. Turn their faces to the side and see if anything is blocking their mouths. Emma followed the instructions, first turning Oliver's small face to the side. There was nothing in his mouth, and though he was breathing, it was shallow. She checked Jake and Rachel the same way. All three were breathing but had very low levels of consciousness. The ambulance will arrive in 5 minutes. Please open windows for ventilation. There's a possibility of carbon monoxide poisoning. Following the operator's instructions, Emma began frantically opening every window. Hearing the words, carbon monoxide poisoning, Emma checked the heating equipment. From an old kerosene heater in the corner of the living room, there was a faint strange odor. It was a backup heating device they usually didn't use, but for some reason it was running today. Emma quickly turned it off. Why today of all days? Emma murmured. Usually Jake avoided using that old heating device because he said he had concerns about its safety. But today, for some reason, it had been in use. While holding Oliver's small hand, Emma attempted mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Recalling the procedures she had learned in a nursing class, she pinched her son's nose and blew air into his mouth. However, there was no clear response. She tried the same with Jake and Rachel, but all three remained in a deep unconscious state. Looking around the room again, the traces of struggle became more clearly visible. Sofa cushions had fallen to the floor, and near them was a broken coffee mug. Coffee stains had spread on the carpet and were still damp. Several picture frames that should have been on the table had also fallen over. What on earth happened? Emma murmured aloud. Had there been some kind of trouble among the family members? Had something happened with Rachel? However, if it was carbon monoxide poisoning, even if there had been an argument, ultimately everyone would have lost consciousness from gas poisoning. She could hear the sound of sirens in the distance. She could tell the ambulance was approaching. Emma quickly opened the front door so the emergency personnel could enter without getting lost. She could see red lights flashing against the twilight sky. When the ambulance arrived, 3 emergency personnel quickly entered the house. They began checking the condition of the 3 people with practiced efficiency. It appears to be carbon monoxide poisoning, the senior emergency technician told Emma. Fortunately, they're still breathing, so we'll transport them to the hospital immediately. Will everyone be okay? Emma's voice was shaking with tears. With proper treatment, there's a high possibility of recovery. However, we need to start oxygen therapy as soon as possible. The emergency personnel placed all 3 on stretchers and fitted them with oxygen masks. The sight of a large mask covering Oliver's small face tore at Emma's heart. Jake and Rachel were also treated similarly and carried to the ambulance. "Ma'am, please come to the hospital with us," the emergency technician told Emma. "As a precaution, you should be examined too." Emma grabbed her handbag and Jake's insurance card with trembling hands and rode in the ambulance. As the sirens wailed, she alternately held the hands of her husband, son, and sister. Inside the vehicle, the emergency personnel continuously monitored the condition of all 3. "It's 10 more minutes to St. Mary's Hospital," the emergency technician told Emma. "Your family members have stable consciousness levels, so they'll surely be fine." Emma nodded, but she couldn't stop crying. Just a few hours ago, she had been looking forward to Thanksgiving dinner. The happy family gathering she had thought about on the drive home from Chicago had now turned into a nightmare. The waiting room of the intensive care unit at St. Mary's Hospital was eerily quiet under the white fluorescent lights. Emma sat in a hard plastic chair, watching the clock hands past 2 in the morning. More than 6 hours had passed, but there were still no clear signs of recovery from any of her family members. Nurses came regularly to give her brief reports on the condition of all 3. The diagnosis of carbon monoxide poisoning was confirmed, and high-concentration oxygen therapy was continuing. Fortunately, their lives were not in danger, but the doctor explained that the timing of regaining consciousness varied by individual. Especially for small children like Oliver, who were more susceptible to the effects of carbon monoxide than adults, recovery might take longer. Emma stared at the coffee cup in her hands. It was her third cup, but she had barely touched it. In her head, the day's events replayed over and over again. Why had that old heating device been used? Normally, Jake would never use that dangerous appliance. And what did the traces of struggle in the living room mean? A little after 3 in the morning, a nurse came to Emma. "Mrs. Carter, your husband has regained consciousness." Hearing those words, Emma stood up. She could feel her legs shaking. When she entered Jake's room, her husband was weakly opening his eyes while wearing an oxygen mask. When he saw Emma's face, relief appeared in his eyes. Emma pulled up a chair and took Jake's hand. That hand was warmer than she had expected, giving Emma a sense that he was alive. "Emma." Jake's voice was hard to hear through the oxygen mask, coming out hoarse. "Sorry, it's my fault. You don't need to talk. Just rest now," Emma said while wiping away tears. However, Jake shook his head. "I have to talk. I need to explain about Rachel to you." Emma's heart began to race. So something had happened with her sister after all. What happened? Take your time and tell me. Jake took a deep breath and moved the oxygen mask slightly aside. "This morning, before you came back from your business trip, Rachel came over. She said she'd help with the Thanksgiving preparations. At first it was normal. She was cooking with Oliver, and I was preparing the turkey. And then, in the afternoon, while Oliver was playing a game in the living room, when we were alone in the kitchen." Jake paused as if choosing his words carefully. Rachel suddenly started saying strange things. Emma waited for her husband's next words, feeling an unpleasant premonition. She said, "There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time." And then, "Jake, I love you." Emma's chest tightened. The unease she had vaguely felt had become reality in that moment. "At first I thought it was a joke. But she was serious." She said, "Emma's always on business trips, so you must be lonely, right? I can understand you. We'd be much better together." It kept getting more and more serious. Jake paused and checked Emma's reaction. Emma was upset but encouraged her husband to continue. "I firmly refused. I told her clearly, 'Rachel, you're my sister-in-law. And I love Emma with all my heart. I can't return your feelings.'" Emma felt somewhat relieved. She could confirm her husband's integrity once again. But Rachel didn't give up. She said, "Why can't it be me? I could make you happier than Emma." She kept getting more and more emotional. Fatigue permeated Jake's voice. So that led to the struggle. She started crying and screaming. Then she began throwing dishes. She was yelling, "Why won't you choose me?" while throwing the dishes that were in the kitchen onto the floor. I tried to calm her down, but it didn't work. Emma remembered the scattered kitchen scene she had seen that morning. That had been the destructive behavior Rachel caused in her emotional state. Oliver came down from the living room when he heard the commotion. He said, "Daddy, I'm scared." "Why is Auntie crying?" "I thought I had to protect my son, so I stood between Rachel and Oliver." Jake continued painfully. Rachel completely lost self-control, knocking over chairs and dropping things from the table onto the floor. I picked up Oliver and headed to the living room, trying to evacuate him to a safe place first. And that's when the carbon monoxide poisoning happened. That's right. Actually, the house heating had been acting up since morning, and Rachel had turned on the old kerosene heater on her own. I told her it was dangerous and to stop, but she said, "Just for a little while," and wouldn't listen. And while we were absorbed in the argument, nobody paid attention to it anymore. Emma was beginning to understand the situation. Rachel's reckless behavior and the emotional fight that followed had ultimately put the entire family in danger. Oliver lost consciousness first. He was playing in the living room and suddenly said, "My head hurts," and collapsed right there. I rushed to my son in a panic, and Rachel was also looking on with concern. But we too gradually became lightheaded. With Jake's explanation, Emma understood the full scope of that morning's disaster. Her sister's selfish romantic feelings and her husband's honest rejection of them. And the carbon monoxide poisoning accident that occurred during the emotional struggle. "How is Rachel now?" Emma asked. "I think she still hasn't regained consciousness. But according to the doctor, there's hope for recovery." Jake answered with an exhausted expression. "Emma, I'm really sorry. If I had handled it better, this wouldn't have happened." Emma squeezed her husband's hand tightly. "You're not at fault. Rachel's behavior was unpredictable. And I'm grateful that you protected our marriage." Just then, a nurse entered the room. "Mrs. Carter, your son has regained consciousness. You can see him now." Emma and Jake hurried to Oliver's room as quickly as possible. Their 6-year-old son was opening his eyes on the small bed, and when he saw his mother's face, he smiled faintly. "Mommy, my head hurt. But I'm okay now." Oliver's voice was weak but his consciousness was clear. Emma hugged her son while crying. "I'm sorry you had to go through something scary. You're okay now." The next morning, Rachel also regained consciousness. When Emma visited her room, her sister was staring at the ceiling with an expression tormented by deep guilt. "Emma." Rachel's voice was shaking with tears. "Because of me, even Oliver was put in danger. I don't know how to apologize." Emma sat by her sister's bedside. "First, can you explain why you did such a thing?" Rachel began to speak through her tears. "Since the divorce, I was really lonely. Jake always seemed so kind, like an ideal husband. Before I knew it, my admiration had turned into romantic feelings. When I was with him, I had the illusion that I was loved too. But he's my husband. And he's your brother-in-law. I know that. But I couldn't control my emotions. On Thanksgiving Day, I decided to gather the courage to tell him my feelings. I thought maybe Jake felt the same way." Rachel continued while wiping her tears. "But when he clearly rejected me, I was faced with reality. How selfish I had been, how much I had hurt the family, and most of all, I had put Oliver in danger." Emma had complex emotions. Along with anger toward her sister, she also felt sympathy for her loneliness. But above all, gratitude for her husband's integrity filled her heart. For several days after leaving the hospital, heavy silence continued in the Carter house. Rachel had spoken words of deep apology at the hospital, but how to repair the relationship going forward wasn't a simple matter. Though Oliver had recovered his health, he couldn't completely forget the fear of that day and sometimes woke up with nightmares in the middle of the night. A week later, Rachel called Emma. "There's something I want to discuss." Her voice had lost its former brightness. The three of them decided to meet at a coffee shop. They thought that in a public place, they could avoid becoming too emotional. "I've decided to move to San Francisco," Rachel began with that statement. "Staying here, I can't repair the relationship with you all, and I can't move forward myself either." Emma was surprised but understood the weight of her sister's decision. "Do you think that's best?" Putting Oliver in danger was absolutely unforgivable. My selfish emotions threatened the life of a 6-year-old child. To face that fact, I need to put some distance between us. Deep regret and determination dwelled in Rachel's eyes. Jake had been listening quietly but finally spoke up. "Rachel, I understand that you're repentant. But I don't think you need to completely cut off the relationship. We can take time and build a new relationship." "Thank you, Jake. But right now, I need time to change myself." 2 months later, Rachel started a new job at a small design company in San Francisco. While receiving regular counseling, she spent her days facing her emotions. She and Emma began exchanging brief emails once a month. The distance allowed them both to calmly re-examine their relationship. In the Carter household, there were many changes following that incident. All the old heating equipment was replaced with safe new ones, and carbon monoxide detectors were installed in each room. But the biggest change was that they came to treasure the time spent together as a family even more than before. Emma reduced the number of her business trips and made sure to spend weekends with her family. Time with Jake and Oliver became an irreplaceable treasure. She newly felt her husband's integrity and love, and her gratitude for their married life deepened. On Thanksgiving a year later, only 3 people sat at the Carter family's dining table. Oliver had turned 7 and had overcome the fear of that day, showing his bright smile again. The turkey Jake had prepared was perfectly cooked, and the family was quietly enjoying their meal. Just then, a letter arrived in the mailbox. It was correspondence from Rachel in San Francisco. Emma read the letter after dinner. "Dear Emma, Jake, and Oliver, when I think of Thanksgiving a year ago, my heart still aches. But in this past year, I've learned many things. That true love means putting the other person's happiness first. And that family isn't just about blood ties, but relationships where people can respect each other, support each other, and sometimes forgive each other. Through counseling, I've been facing my loneliness and learning how to build healthy human relationships. I've met wonderful colleagues at my new workplace and am gradually feeling a true sense of fulfillment. I'm deeply grateful for the example of true family that you showed me. Someday, I want to build relationships that can truly be called family too. With love, Rachel." After finishing the letter, Emma smiled quietly. She could feel that her sister was truly growing in the real sense. In the living room, Jake and Oliver were putting together a puzzle. That room, which had become a place of terror a year ago, was now once again filled with the warm laughter of the family. Emma thought to herself as she watched the two of them, blood ties don't make a family. The relationship where people choose each other, trust each other, and support each other even in difficult times, that's what a true family is. Outside the window, the first snow was beginning to fall quietly. As if announcing the beginning of a new season.